Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Batman Caped Crusader on Prime Video. Patrick Klepek and I, David Chen, recorded our coverage of this show in two different segments. First, you're going to see our segment covering the first 5 episodes, and then another segment covering the last 5 episodes. Enjoy.
But if that's the case, we could be looking at
an all-out gang war on the streets of Gotham.
Batman Caped Crusader takes us into the early years of Bruce Wayne as the crime-fighting vigilante. This show is executive produced by Bruce Timm, J.J. Abrams, Ed Brubaker, and Matt Reeves, among others. The Caped Crusader show is more grounded and noir-inspired than its predecessor, Batman the Animated Series. 10 episodes are now live on Prime Video. Patrick Klepek and I have watched the first 5. We're going to start with our overall thoughts and get soon into spoilers and details about what happens in the first 5 episodes. But before we do any of that, Patrick Klepek, I'm curious, Batman the Animated Series, what were your thoughts? Did you watch this? Was this a key part of your childhood as it was for mine?
It was key in the same way. I think of it in conjunction with X-Men 97. It was like, I remember watching a lot of it. I don't remember very much about it. Like, whereas with X-Men 97, when I think back, like, what is my core memory of that? It's like a lot of people. It's like the intro and the music. And I know I watched a lot of it, but like the story beats don't come back to me. Here, it's like the art, like the look, the voice. Like, those are the things that I still think about with that original series, even if the plotting and characters have mostly receded into memory. And so it was part of my appointment viewing. I just, in terms of what actually happened in the show, it's always a delight when something comes across my timeline and it like unearths. It's like, I do remember watching this scene in the show. It's just not something that stuck in my memory because it came at an age where, I was watching 20 different cartoons at the time, and it was one of many, but certainly one of my favorites at the time.
I will say that it's a little bit higher than that for me. I remember watching the show religiously when I was a kid. I think it aired on the WB, if I recall correctly, and it was appointment viewing for me. Like, every day I would watch the show when it was on. And I do agree with you that the art does stick with me, but I think really what the animated series was quite memorable for were the colorful villains, the Rogues Gallery, right? Mark Hamill playing Joker, I believe, right? And just some really cool villain character. Scarecrow, the way Scarecrow was designed. Clayface is like nightmare-inducing character that I thought about since then. And so Batman the Animated Series was, separate than the Tim Burton movies, my primary experience of Batman as a character growing up. Have a lot of affection for that series. I watched like an episode or two to kind of prepare for this conversation, and I think it still holds up. Like, it's still very solid. It's still, has great voice acting, and I would still strongly recommend it. You can stream the entire series on Max, the one to watch for HBO. But let's get into Batman Caped Crusader. So, different take on Batman a little bit. It theoretically happens decades earlier than the Batman we saw in Batman the animated series, and also reimagines a lot of the origin stories for some of the villains that we used to know. So overall, Patrick Klepek, what do you think of Batman Caped Crusader?
I've quite enjoyed my time with it. I had no idea where the setting was, or that we were doing this more grounded, less technology-focused take on Batman. It really worked for me once I was in the groove of it. And as someone that's consumed a lot of different takes on Batman over the years, this one that kind of balances between Batman and also compelling plots for the kind of the cop and like the city architecture, it really worked for me. I don't know that it's Batman the Animated Series, but that's a high bar to clear. Is it like a really enjoyable take on Batman? I mean, I think it does that quite well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that like no one really explains the premise of the show to you. Like, I guess they just assume you're like, okay, you're gonna just get that it's like earlier than Batman the Animated Series, and also all the characters are different now. Like, it's not Oswald Cobblepot, it's Oswalda Cobblepot, which is a very, I have to say, I am not opposed to reimagining Penguin as a woman. But I think they could have done some work on the name. Just add an A to it. But yeah, there's no like text. There's no like intro text explaining like, hey, like, decades before. These stories might be a little different than the ones but no one does any of that. They're just like, hey, we just expect you to get it. And I do admire the confidence in that. Yes, I've also quite enjoyed the show so far. And kind of like with X-Men 97, watching the show, my reaction is, oh, this is how I remember
Yeah.
Batman the Animated Series. But then you go back, watch Batman the Animated Series, the animation is a little rougher, right? It's not made for 4K, right? Like this show is. And so it's just less sharp in general. And but it's kind of does this great job of evoking what you thought it would have been, or what you thought it would have been if they'd taken Batman the Animated Series and showed it on TV today. But it's actually, quite a bit sort of I would say the animation is a little bit more sophisticated, and the art style is roughly the same, which I think is quite excellent. One of the big changes that the show has made is Kevin Conroy, RIP, no longer voicing Batman. He's been the voice of Batman for like my whole life, one of the iconic depictions of Batman. He has now been replaced by Hamish Linklater, an extremely talented actor. I am curious what you think of Hamish's performance as Batman in Cape Crusader.
3 buildings blown to pieces. You falsified the reports. Who paid you?
It's a little distracting at first by no fault of the talent involved. It just speaks to the legacy of Kevin Conroy and how so many people have been associated with that character. So many people have given Batman like an iconic look or feel. And yet I think Conroy sort of like is up there with like Superman and Reeves as like, there will be other people that take up this mantle. You will never forget the Kevin Conroy run on this character. There was just a gravitas and humanity that Conroy brought to it. So it's so unfair. And like it is especially, it's a little bit different in live action because your brain can immediately do the mental gymnastics. I'm looking at a different person. Obviously, this is going to look, sound, and feel different. And even though Cape Crusader is going for a different look, it's chasing after similar art style to the animated series. Like it is in conversation with the animated series. And so the moment that Bruce Wayne or Batman starts talking, it feels off.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be pretty distracting for early parts of the series. There's almost a when I was like half paying attention to different parts of the show, like he almost has a voice that like bleeds into like H. John Benjamin. There's almost like an Archer like quality to his voice that I was like, oh, I don't like this. Like this isn't a comedic show. But then eventually, a couple episodes in, it has bled away. I don't know that I find the voice to be particularly noteworthy, but I'm not distracted anymore. And I can just engage with the stories being told on the screen. But if you have that legacy, if you're like David, if you're like myself, you're going to have to give yourself a little bit of grace to just not be sort of, it's because it comes so close to, I mean, I know he's passed for a bit now, but because of the nature of voice acting, we're still getting projects where he is the voice. He was just in the Suicide Squad video game voicing Batman. He's still been in animated adaptations that have been going sort of like, direct to video. So we're still surrounded by the legacy and weight of Conroy. And here then inserts, hey, we're going to do a kind of sequel series. I know it's a prequel, but like in the sense, like we're coming to a legacy sequel sort of series. And to not have his voice there, it's just hard to get over, but I was able to get there. Were you also able to get there? Did you go on any sort of similar journey with the show early on?
I think the voice is fine, but I think I'd point out 2 issues I have with it. One is that it really feels like Hamish Linklater, who, by the way, again, have you seen Hamish? Are you familiar with his work, by the way?
Not off the top of my head. Now you're gonna make me look it up.
The big thing he was in was Mike Flanagan's show Midnight Mass, which in my
God,
opinion,
wow, oh yes, king of the monologue, Midnight Mass, one of the all-timers.
Midnight Mass, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. Like I'm actually
Agreed.
really bummed I can't own that show on Blu-ray because I think
Absolutely
it's like
agree.
just really brilliant show. But Hamish Linklater, I think, has chosen to play Batman by kind of doing a Kevin Conroy impression. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of it feels like he's trying to do what Kevin Conroy did for both the Batman and the Bruce Wayne characters. And I think that's a problem because it will just then inevitably be compared to Kevin Conroy. Like he hasn't like taken it in his own direction. I don't think. Does that make sense? Like I don't think he's been like
No, it does.
oh,
I think these characters find themselves in a box, right? Like everyone's been chases Mark Hamill's Joker. Like it's sort like Mark Hamill. Obviously, there were Jokers before, there were Jokers after. But when you listen to the Joker in an anime, like put aside the live action stuff, it's just people. When Mark Hamill's done a lot of that, but he doesn't do as much. He doesn't reprise every Joker role these days. He's pretty choosy about that. You see the legacy there. It's just people like give the people what they want, which is Mark Hamill doing the Joker. And I think that puts, as an actor, it puts you in a real box. Like to take a chance with the character, are you just angering like the audience? But by chasing the original structure, tenor, and style, all you're doing is exposing yourself to criticism for like what you can't achieve in the portrayal.
Yeah, yeah. Now, it probably was a no-win situation because if he'd just done a whole different take on it, we'd probably be complaining about that too. But I don't know. I think I would have at least said like, "Oh, he's trying to make it his own, and it doesn't quite work." But at least it's something. At least it's an ethos. But that's one issue. I think the other issue is like so far the range has been very limited. Do you know what I mean? I have felt like the range of emotion that these characters have is very limited. Now, maybe that's going to change towards the end of the show. But one of the things that Batman, the original, the animated series, is known for is like that character, Batman, the character, had a lot of emotional range, right? And just was like a more active figure. Like I'm going to be honest, Bruce Wayne / Batman feels like a pretty minor character in the show to me. Which
he's not the A plot.
Which I don't recall feeling was the case with Batman the Animated Series. And that's just odd. The show has a lot of characters it wants to introduce us to, and many of them are really cool, and I'm invested. But it's just weird to be watching a Batman show where Batman is a minor character, it feels like to me.
No, I think you're right. It feels more like a show about the Gotham City Police that also happens to have Batman as a main character, as opposed to Batman the Animated Series it had arcs, but it was broadly episodic serialized television about Batman goes after this villain of the week.
Yeah.
And not every villains were defeated, but they came, all the sort of stuff that happens in superhero storytelling. This is very much like the story of Gotham, of the politics of Gotham, the policing of Gotham, and what happened when the Batman was introduced to it. And Bruce's interiority, Batman as a figure, it's present, but it's not the center of the show, which is not even inherently a bad thing.
Right. That's not even a complaint necessarily.
No,
it's just like an observation.
It's not what I expected
from
the show. And it took me a while to sort of sit in with, we're going to open many episodes with what's going on at the police rather than what's going on with Batman.
Yeah. So that's just like an observation I have is like, we're not really getting that much Batman or Bruce Wayne in the show, which again, maybe the show has concluded we've already done all that. Like we don't need to do all that. We've already done all that in the animated series. What's some new territory we can mine? And I admire them striking off in a bold direction. Again, got to get to the end of the season to really decide whether it fully works. But the only other thing I'll say before we start, I want to start talking about like some of these specific characters because the show does reimagine these characters in very interesting ways. And so I want to talk about that. But I do think it's I'll just say I'm still trying to figure out what to make of their decision to seemingly set this in an earlier time period than Batman the Animated Series, but not really address, like, I guess Gotham of the 1930s or whatever is not like similar to the United States of the 1930s. There's some mild sexism that is referred to, and as far as I can tell, no racism that is referred to in the show. And so it's just kind of like, the show doesn't explicitly have a time period that it's taking place? It doesn't. I don't think so. Right? Does it say the year at any point? I don't think so.
No,
Right?
but I mean, you can infer a lot from
Right.
like the
The
technology,
technology
like
and
the structure of the
the Art
city.
Deco style. Like so theoretically, it's taking place like before the 60s, right? And
It's
so
a very progressive 1940s Gotham City.
right, exactly.
Like, I
That's what
don't
I'm
really
saying. It's like,
buy that, like, you know, queer black women could be just openly like kissing at a
right,
restaurant.
right. So that's kind of the question is like what is the purpose of setting it in an earlier time period? And it seems like from what I can tell, it's not to address how like these societal issues and how Batman would intersect with them in any way. I don't think. I think it's just to it's essentially like a stylistic decision, right? It's essentially just, hey, this is a noir style show. We're going to set this in an earlier time period in the Batman universe to kind of feed into that noir aesthetic and tone,
I think it's
but not necessarily. Yeah, go ahead.
I think
Am
it's
I
a
off base?
little
Go
more.
ahead.
I think it's a little more than that, because part of what I find interesting about the show is Batman's tool set is just limited. Like, and that is
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
is a function of the era of the show. He doesn't have a jet. He doesn't have a submarine. Like, how does he figure out where to find people? He's listening on the radio like
Right.
everybody else.
He
And
and his like the Batmobile is like literally just like a cool car, right?
it's a
From what
hot
I
rod.
could
Like,
tell.
that's how it's in the
Right.
audio clip the audience
Yeah.
has to listen to. It's referred to as a hot rod. And it does just seem like a cool car. So I think it goes further than just being, wouldn't it be neat from an
Right.
art style perspective? It makes it so when Batman's doing his detective work,
He
trying to
has
figure
more obstacles that he has
part
to
of it is like,
overcome,
where
basically. Yeah.
is somebody?
Yeah.
You know, and there's storytelling that occurs in the show that, like, if he's across town, he's got to get across town, which is not something that Batman grapples with in modern stories. Like,
Right.
he can get there pretty easily with all of his gadgets and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I agree with you that it sort of chooses to just hand wave a lot of like it's
The societal
and obviously
implications, right.
we have no problems, like people know us, like we don't have a problem with any of these sort of like characters being depicted, but it is in contrast to the period and how characters would have observed that, and the show just hand waves that away. But I don't think it's as simple as just being aesthetic. I think it is.
Yeah.
It's picking and choosing the consequences of the era and how it wants to deploy that, and in terms of how it impacts the characters.
Yeah, it impacts the plot mechanics of the story, right? It impacts like this Batman is also a detective. That's cool, right? About the show is in most of the modern DC stuff, like particularly in the Zack Snyder movies, that's what I'm referring to. He doesn't really do that much detecting, right?
No.
Or even
More
in the
ass
Chris Nolan
kicking.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the Chris Nolan stuff too. He does a little bit. It's not like he doesn't do any, but it's like the detective. But the detective part is like a really important part of this show. It's like clearly that's like half of what he does. Basically, is like figuring things out, and so gotta admire that as well. That they're choosing to bring the detective back to the Dark Knight. Okay. In the first 5 episodes, we kind of see different versions or different origin stories of some beloved characters. So why don't we talk about what we thought about these characters and what we thought about this version of the story? So specifically, for instance, the first episode begins with Oswalda Cobblepot, who is this show's version of Penguin. This one is played by Minnie Driver. I think you and I both thought this is a weird one to start with. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, what'd you think? First of all, I have to say, uh, I never thought I'd find myself being sexually attracted to Penguin, but this show made it happen. And so, wow, what an
Surprises are
accomplishment!
still possible in 2024.
What an accomplishment! What
David.
an accomplishment! But putting my own proclivities aside, no real complaints with the depiction of the character. It just felt like a weird episode to start with to kind of introduce this world to us. You know what I mean?
That's
What'd
where
you-
I ended up.
Yeah,
I
what'd you
felt
think?
like I
What'd you
was. Yeah, I found myself pretty bored in the first episode. It didn't really grip me into putting me in this world. It doesn't do a ton of, and it's fine. Like, the show in general doesn't do a lot of table setting. It just I think in some ways it
Yeah.
makes some pretty broad assumptions about your familiarity with the
Yeah.
characters, your familiarity. This is a show that I'm sure can be enjoyed on its own, but I think is in conversation with the long history of Batman to do certain amounts of subversions and recontextualizations without having to explain it to the audience. Like, hey, we think you're here with us, and we're going to yada, yada, yada our way to some of this so that we can do the part that we think is interesting.
There's no explanation of, hey, we're in the multiverse, and that's why there's an Oswalda Cobblepot here. There's nothing like that.
That is hand in hand with comic books. Like, comic books do all sorts of one-offs, what-ifs that are not like, what are the consequences of this for the broader continuity? It doesn't care for it's just this would be interesting if we told the story this way. And my problem has nothing to do with telling the story in this way. Would it be interesting? Because I think it gets there. I just found the first episode messy and kind of broadly uninteresting, and in many ways has, like, for a show that is both serialized but has a lot of narrative hooks that are carrying over episode to episode. It's telling an arc over the course of this season.
Right.
I found the first episode kind of perfunctory, non-consequential, and I don't know, just not that engaging. Episode 2 is where the show really sort of got me, and I was on for the ride. So if you're listening to this and like, I'm going to give this a chance, like, at least 2 episodes, like, give it 2 or 3 episodes. They're on the shorter side. Give yourself 2 or 3 to determine whether you buy what they're selling with the show. Because that first episode, again, it's a fascinating portrayal of Cobblepot. Like, I was in it for that. It's just everything else around it didn't really click into place for me in that first episode.
It kind of feels like the one episode that could have occurred at any point in the season. Like,
yeah, it feels like a filler episode.
It feels like a filler episode.
But I mean that was like filler complimentary, which is like when we used to get shows that were 20 plus episode runs. Yeah. Sometimes it's cool to just have a diversionary story that is inconsequential but kind of fun, brings in a character that doesn't have to play into a broader arc. And it just didn't feel like that was where the show needed to start. This feels like episode 5 after a big moment and before we get back to the broader arc, but instead it's where the show starts.
I'm not going to harp on it any longer than what I've already said after this sentence, but I just find it so fascinating how they have chosen to kind of introduce this show to the public. Like, when X-Men 97 came out, for instance, like, there was a previously on, hey, FYI, remember from like 25 years ago, like, this is the last thing that happened in the show, right? Of course, that wouldn't make any goddamn sense in this show because this show takes place before the events of Batman the Animated Series. So it's like, it doesn't make sense to have a previously on, but then just no text at all. No, I just find it fascinating. Whatever. The show's doing well, so maybe they chose the right path, but it's just like, what I speculate, like, would there have been some other way that they could have better set up this world for viewers?
And I don't think either of us are saying, give us another Batman origin story, please.
No, not at all.
That we don't need that. Batman is like a Spider-Man. Like, we have been there, we have done that. Make the assumption that people know why this character is the way they are. But I think I'm with you on, I would have liked a better on-ramp to just, what are the stakes of this city? What are the stakes for Batman and Bruce Wayne?
Yeah.
You start inferring that, you get there with the show, but it feels like we're watching season 2. Like, I feel like I missed something.
And I'm not even saying origin story, but I'm saying, like, okay, you could have an episode teeing all that stuff up that you just said.
Yeah.
Or you could literally just, like, some intro text of, like, it's the 1930s in Gotham City.
We joined Batman as yada yada.
Something like that would have been fine. I'd be like, oh, okay, I kind of get what, like, oh, you want me to rely on the past information? Oh, great. Now I'm just like, is it the same character from the animated series? I don't know. Like, who knows? So maybe it doesn't matter, as you said. Like, it's a comic book, series, and maybe it doesn't really matter. But whatever. Either way, weird first episode. No issues with Oswalda Cobblepot as a character or Minnie Driver's portrayal, but just kind of a weird way to get into this world again.
Yeah.
Episode 2, the Saga of Basil Karlo. This was really cool. I thought this is a really awesome episode, and because basically this guy is Clayface, right? And the thing is, Clayface is one of the most evocative villains from the original Batman the Animated Series. One of the most like still, like, I have images in my mind of that character's origin story and like their abilities and skills. They're super overpowered in the animated series, and here it's like a much more grounded version of that character, a more quote unquote realistic version of that character. And just really really well done overall. What do you think about this version of Clayface, Patrick Klepek?
I thought it was great. Again, like this little one-off was what sold me on what is this show trying to, like, why Batman? Why
Right.
here? Why
Why
this
do it again? Why do it
context?
again? What are you trying to add to this? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And like this, a very familiar, Batman villain. This is the advantage of like using historical character is you get an opportunity to play with the familiarity and surprise audiences, tell a story in a different way. And I think this episode really encapsulates it. It might be my favorite episode of the season. Like, I know it happens really early, and I'm not even going to suggest like it goes downhill from there, but it just encapsulates everything that I find interesting about this show and what it's trying to do. Like, when it's at its best, it's everything that goes into this episode, which is a really fascinating spin on a character I already know. Fascinating dynamics between the police, Batman, the city, and its own rhythms. And importantly, they give a lot of voice to the villain. It's not just a like foil for Batman. You understand this character, why they did what they did, and I just thought it worked on. It was an exceptional like episode of television, and I really bought that character, and it's a fun mix of like fear and tragedy, and it all really worked for me. And the depiction of him is like scary, and like the first time that his face like really deforms is like really upsetting.
Yeah. Great episode. Great episode, television. Love this new idea of Clayface. It's just like, yeah, as you said. Oh, I get it now. I get why they wanted to do a different version. It's just a reimagining of this character in a way that also has emotional weight to it. Love it. Great episode. Episode 3, Kiss of the Catwoman. So we get a version of Catwoman, who, by the way, is played by I think Christina Ricci. Uh, I thought this was okay. Like I didn't love it. I think the Catwoman character is kind of too delusional and annoying for my taste. Like first of all, look, I understand. I'm not I wasn't born yesterday. I understand that rich people have a different justice system and they often get preferential treatment and so on and so forth. Um, but the way it's depicted in the show is just so outlandish that it's just kind of like, okay, because she assaults a police officer, right, in
Yeah.
the show. She assaults a police officer, and they're like, and the district attorney's like, well, we're gonna give you another chance. It's like, okay, maybe something later on will be revealed that explains all this, but like, uh, I don't know. It just was kind of like I found the character more annoying than I did compelling. What do you think, Patrick?
Well, I'm with you, and I think part of that is because the weakest link in the show is the Harvey Dent character.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the season long arcs over
Yeah.
pretty clearly how is he going to become Two-Face in this version of the story, and he's one of those ever present characters that's kind of dipping in and out of episodes. Never quite a main, but always clearly an important player that will, my guess, be a big part of the latter half of the season. And part of how you would buy Selena Kyle, I almost said Selena Myers because I have Veep on the brain from the last couple of weeks so much, is that interaction with Harvey Dent being a stand-in for the broader like justice system and its own injustices in Gotham City. And I just don't think it works. Like, I don't think they do a good job of portraying her relationship with the justice system and how she can take advantage of it. Especially because that the show is trying to portray this version of Catwoman as like, well, her father's in jail, so she's kind of selling everything to like maintain this identity and this lifestyle that she actually doesn't really have because she's not really doing anything. And it just, none of that stuff quite gelled together for me. And I think in order to make this version of Catwoman work, you need that this version, especially because this show is portraying so much of the inner workings of the justice system, of Gotham City and its relationship to crime. Like, if that part falls flat, well, you're going to undercut both Dent and Kyle at the same time. And I think that's ultimately kind of what happens here. The best part is their interactions with Batman.
Yeah.
Everything else sort of is kind of, take it or leave it.
Something you mentioned, Patrick, was the relationship between Batman and the police force. And I agree, that is also a pretty well done part of the show. Episode 4 kind of really dives into it. Episode 4 is called Night of the Hunters. And it is a story about how they try to bait Batman out of the shadows by deploying a character named Firebug.
So good.
Yeah, I don't know that I think Firebug is the greatest character, but like, it's funny the way it plays out. Of they leave all of his stuff for him, and they expect him to run away.
Well, you got to pick a minor villain that you can, kill off and not feel.
It was
too bad
cool that they
about it.
showed like the world from Firebug's perspective, and you see everyone's on fire and stuff.
That was horrifying. I thought that was really evocative, and effective to give you a sense of, what exactly motivates this villain. And in many ways, I was hoping that was going to be something the show did a little more often. That is not really the case. I don't need everything to be from the eyes of the villain, but I thought at its best, the show is finding ways to do that, right? Like, I think the Clayface episode.
With Clayface, you got a really clear sense of that. Right. Character had very clear motivations, and you understood kind of why they would be driven to do what they did. But Firebug is not really a fully fleshed character. He's just kind of a plot mechanic. But I do appreciate, like, you really feel how contentious things are between Batman and the police, and how they're at odds and trying to like trap each other and stuff. Bullock was a main character in the original Batman the Animated Series. Do you remember that character?
No, I'm gonna make me look it up.
Yeah. So he was like a really significant part of Batman the Animated Series. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, 100%. Yes, the chewing on. Yes, okay, yeah. I'm back.
Yeah. But anyway, wanted to give a shout out because it's like, in real life, not everyone would necessarily be on board with the whole Batman thing, and I like that. In all depictions of Batman that we've seen, it's always him and Commissioner Gordon have like a really tight relationship, right? And they're like working together on cases. And here, it's much more sort of they're operating independently and need to try to stay out of each other's way most of the time, right? Like, that's kind of my feeling on it, and I think that's an interesting dynamic to explore. So,
well, I think they're making the characters earn it, right? Like, there is one of the things that it's slow playing and not just baking into, and here's where we pick up with the characters, is I can imagine in many ways, like this show, which I think has already been renewed for a second season. How does like a quote vigilante, like dispensing justice in this way, how do you square that with people trying to do right by a system that has rules and expectations? And Batman, however helpful he might be in certain situations, ultimately throws into chaos a city's ability to reckon with itself and have its own dynamics, and not just jumping straight to Commissioner Gordon has a cheat code that's called Batman that he can call on when things get weird. I like the fact that they are working in parallel. Even in parallel, they are at odds with one another, even if they are not necessarily oppositional. And that's some of the best stuff this show has going. And I'm crossing my fingers they don't hit the accelerator on that. I would like for that to continue to be one of the things the show is playing with, as opposed to this season ending with a bat signal.
Yeah. Let's talk about Harleen Quinzel, because in episode 5 we get a little bit more understanding of that. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite parts of the show. First of all, in most depictions of Batman that I have seen in my life, it's very rare to see Harleen Quinzel before she becomes Harley Quinn. Just flat out. And that's a bummer. Most of the time we see, like, for instance, in like the original David Ayer Suicide Squad, we saw like glimpses of her, I think, as a psychiatrist. And that's usually what you see. You see like a brief flashback where she was treating Joker, and she's always been defined in relationship to Joker. In fact, I think that's like kind of what the character was originally before it
Mhm.
even was depicted on screen. It was like always defined in relationship to Joker. So when we meet Harleen Quinzel as a psychiatrist in the show, I thought to myself, "Oh, interesting. They have like cases outside of Joker. They're not working at Arkham Asylum, right?" And so I thought that was. I'm already on board with this, just like as a more interesting way into that character. And then to have that character be so sick of all the terrible shit that she hears, that she is going to basically imprison her patients and force them to be better people, sometimes by torturing them. I just thought it's super dark, and wow, this is so much more compelling than any other version of Harley Quinn we've seen, other than maybe Birds of Prey or whatever. Like it's just like I thought this was awesome, and not only that, the character design is
Mhm.
also really cool. So this was like a home run for me of redefining the character of Harley Quinn. What do you think, Patrick Klepek?
No, I'm with you. It gets at some of the best questions the show is asking, which is when a city fails its citizens,
Right.
where do the solutions come from? And it's stuff like this, right? Like it is the psychiatrist listening to some of the, you know, they're not out on the street stabbing people, but they are contributing to the corruption of a city and are never held to account.
Yeah.
And if you snapped, what would you do about it? And the way that they portray that is like really fascinating and interesting. And haven't watched the second half of the season. I love the idea of inverting the Quinn Joker relationship. I don't know
Hmm.
where they're going to go with this. Every
Right.
Batman story eventually is going to introduce Joker. Like
Yeah.
there is no way this show, but what's great so far is I don't know where that's coming from. You have taken away from me like the usual ways I'm thinking about how does that relationship start, both in terms of like Quinn and
Right.
Batman.
But
That's a genuine
she is the one that has the agency. She's not the one that's corrupted by
right.
Joker in this thing. It's like
And maybe it ends
so
up being the other way
yeah.
around, where like in the origin story of Quinn, Joker produces Quinn.
Yeah.
Here, Quinn
Mm,
produces Joker. The idea of her whole like playtime, like the
yeah.
mechanics of how she operates, it's very, very easy to imagine how they have laid the groundwork for her. The idea of like Batman more generally is like, did the villain, like, does the Rogues Gallery exist or does Batman produce the Rogues Gallery? Here,
Right.
like,
Yeah.
does Quinn produce the Joker?
Right.
And the city produces Batman and Harley Quinn as a result of systemic injustice. And to have such familiar characters and tropes, and you're sitting there going, I don't know how this part of the story, which is as familiar as things get in modern Batman storytelling, I don't know how this is going to play out. That's an exciting place to
I
be,
agree. I agree.
that I did not expect to have halfway through the run of this show.
I'm also just gonna put this out there. I don't know that Harley Quinn or Harleen Quinn in the show is that much different than Batman in the show. Like she's just somebody who's fed up with how things are going, and she's taking matters into her own hands, right? And yes, she's torturing these guys, and that's bad. But it's like, is Batman not torturing them when he's punching them?
Yeah.
You know, when he's subduing them and throwing them into vats, like dangling a guy in front of a train, is that not torturing a guy? You know, prove me wrong, world. Anyway, but yeah, that character is just awesome. That character is awesome. So
The place we're ending is an extremely strong like place to
I
end
agree.
things. Like it really captures why revisit this? Why do this? Like I think often when you're dropping back into a character that is so familiar as Batman and especially Batman's Rogues Gallery, are we just doing this because Batman's popular and like people just will watch Batman stories? And I think by the middle of the season, it has more than justified. We're not, hey, like, didn't you love Batman the animated series? Like, we're doing something like that. That's true, but it takes that and runs with it in fascinating directions that I wasn't expecting and made it very compelled to want to see what do you do with the rest of this season? Because I have found it much more interesting than I expected it to be. It is not just nostalgic fan service. I mean, it's to have this and X-Men 97 in the same year. In many ways, it exaggerates the gulf between like the live action stuff and the animated stuff, because I'm finding myself right now getting so much more out of the animated adaptations of the interpretations of these characters than I am on the screen. And look, I'll take what I can get, but I'm just thankful to have like these interpretations of these characters. I have found both of them to be extremely compelling.
I would agree with that. Yeah, having X-Men 97 and this in one year is quite a gift. But this is almost even more bold than X-Men 97 in some ways.
Yeah.
Right? It's like remixing the origins and characteristics of beloved characters.
I'm a useless, disgusting crybaby. How hard is that to understand?
Now, having watched all 10 episodes of this series, season 1, do you think this show is worth watching?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really high on Crusader by the end of it. I think it makes some really interesting and bold choices with the villains, the arcs of the villains, where it continues to keep its focus on the police department, the decisions it makes about showing the weaknesses and failures of Bruce Wayne / Batman, the limited capabilities of what this character can and cannot do. I like the questions it's asking. I like the answers it's providing that are messy, and just a really interesting, provocative show that I think is probably, it's hard for me to how much of my reaction to the show and my positivity around it is built on my history with this character and what it's doing in relationship to it. I can't separate that. What does this do for a newcomer? Someone that like doesn't have a long history with Batman. Is this a good show, a good entryway to this character? I don't know. But for me, and probably a lot of our audience, like has a long history with Batman, and I cannot help but recommend that you check this one out.
I mostly agree with Patrick. I was not as hot on the second half of this season as I was in the first half. I thought the first half was great, and the second half I thought was I didn't love, and we'll talk about why. But overall, I do think this show is worth checking out, especially if you love Batman the Animated Series. I think the spirit of that show kind of continues here, and it does make some big swings. It does make some interesting choices. So if you're a Batman fan, you should check out Batman Caped Crusader. Episode 6, Night Ride, introduces us to the spirit of Jim Craddock, I'm reading here from Wikipedia, the gambling addicted former owner of an old property that Bruce's friend Lucius Fox recently bought. Now, I literally don't remember Batman the Animated Series being as heavy into supernatural stuff. I mean, maybe it was there. It's been many years. But being as heavy into supernatural stuff as this season of Cape Crusader was. Because there was multiple supernatural episodes. There was this episode and also episode 8, Nocturne, which had Natalia becoming basically like a psychic vampire and sucking the energy out of children. I felt the show episodes 1 through 5 were very grounded. In even though yes, the guy's face is melting and whatever, like it's still something that kind of felt like a part of regular reality. Then you have this ghost coming up riding a horse in this episode, and I felt I just didn't love the supernatural stuff and how heavy this show went into it this season. Like dedicating basically 2 episodes to it. So what did you take about what was your take on the Jim Craddock episode and also the supernatural stuff in general?
I enjoy them in isolation, but I'm in full agreement that it does not feel like in agreement with the rest of the show, especially given its characterization of different villains and how like less exaggerated. I mean, like a Clayface in
right, like
Clayface.
Just the Clayface example is a perfect one. Like in Clayface, he's like a superhero character in the original Batman animated series. Here, it's like, oh, that's a not exactly scientifically accurate, but like a pretty plausible.
But it's a medical experiment gone wrong that doesn't result in somebody, that can. I mean, again, it's separated from reality, but it feels in tune with the reality that's presented to us in the show. Where it was losing me was in both these episodes. Again, and I think I liked Nocturne more than I liked this one, because at least in Nocturne there was a sense of Batman / Bruce Wayne grappling with like, what does it mean to be seen as a monster? I think there's like you can parallels to like his own relationship to Gotham City and yada yada. Here it's mostly just like, I don't know, what does he do when he finds a ghost? And again, the episode itself was kind of silly and entertaining and fine, but it felt weird. Like if you just took that episode and Nocturne out, I think you have a much stronger consistent season of television. I like the arc with, we'll get into Harvey and Two-Face and yada yada, but it feels like these episodes exist to expand the possibilities of the Rogues Gallery here. But I found it disappointing because I was enjoying this more grounded take on, again, like part of the principle we were talking about, that what we liked about this show is like, I like that he has to use a radio to figure out like where people are, and that he can't just get in the bat jet and like go across city in 30 seconds. Like he's got to drive. Like there are restrictions for Batman in place that make his actions, his detective work, really fascinating. And then where we end up in this episode, like he solves it by going to a guy that gives him a MacGuffin that allows him to take care of the villain. It didn't really work for me as as part of the animated series. I forget how long seasons were, but like, again, this is a different era of television where you're getting 20, 30 episodes in a season. Like you have to have an expansive well to pull from to be able to tell enough stories. Here, it felt like there was enough with what they had here to stay grounded with these sets of characters.
Yeah.
And again, it worked for me in isolation, did not work for me as part of a season, is how I would put it.
Yeah. I would say it barely even worked for me in isolation. And yeah, it's disappointing because everything you said, the show, it was like, oh, this is a refreshing, more grounded take on the character and his villains. And then it felt like we just really I was stunned, honestly, when I was watching this shit, because I was like,
I kept waiting for a Scooby-Doo moment, right? Where it's we're going to pull something off them.
Oh, it's like some guys figured out like holographic technology in the 30s or 40s. And it's like, oh, what is going on here? I don't get it. Okay. Well, anyway, didn't like episode 6 at all. Night Ride. Episode 7 also did not like this one. This introduces the villain character Onamapia. And his whole deal is he says words that sound like the noises that the words are referring to. Pretty not cool villain, in my opinion. It just is like, okay, very, very silly. The silliest villain of all so far. I would say the silliest villain of the season, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's right on. I feel like to some degree this feels like Bruce Timm, like part of like gender flipping and reimagining the origin stories is, I think you can see a creator who spent a long time with Batman trying to find different ways in to the character through different tones, different approaches with the villains. And, I think many of them work throughout the course of this season, but I'm with you that like, here comes this begins a string of characters and villains that don't work nearly as well and feel out of step with the other characters and villains we've seen so far.
I'm just surprised they pulled out Onamapia in like season 1. They're saving the Joker for later, which we see in this. But it's like, hey, let's get Onamapia in there. What I will say I liked about this episode is, and throughout the season, is the show does a good job of bringing out the tensions in the police force, like the tension between the law and order parts of the equation, right? There's the legal system with Harvey Dent, Commissioner Gordon's daughter, and then there's like the police officers, what's his name, Braddock, right? Right, and Flash, and you kind of get a sense, like this organization is like really corrupt from the inside. And episode 7, I should say, Moving Target, helps you to see how it's decomposing and how your guardrails for safety are vanishing. And that is something that the season does a pretty good job of. So I like the plot of episode 7. I didn't love the villain, which just seems very, very silly. In this, it's just a silly concept, and I don't think the show does enough to make it like in the Dark Knight. You can kind of get a sense of why Heath Ledger's Joker would have a lot of people following him.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, oh hey, yes, this guy is certifiably insane, but he sure knows how to rile people up. You know,
Right.
he sure knows how to throw a party. He sure knows how to throw a cash burning celebration. Like he has some skills of some kind. And also he has this kind of weird, strange charisma to him. And even though he could kill me at any moment, I'm gonna have fun until I die, and that's something that I can sign up for. I don't know why anyone would follow Onomatopoeia. Like,
Well, it's also just not a very funny show, right? Like, I think it's part of what makes
right.
having exceptionally silly characters feel out of step. Like, the show, like, walks up to that line with, like, Harley Quinn, right? Like, where you have somebody in, like, an exaggerated suit. But, like, that kind of goes with the territory. Like, Bruce Wayne's in a bat costume, and we're just not blinking at that. We're just and, like, so I feel like there are lines the show can walk up to, and I think there are times both here with like the kind of tone and characterization of a villain, and then also when it steps outside the bounds of reality, it just feels out of step with the tone of the rest of the show, which again is brought. There's not really, you're not laughing, like, and so I think when you get characters like that, it feels odd for, again, because it's a truncated season. It feels like episode 17 in a 26 episode season. We're like, all right, yeah, I guess we're got to put in Onamapia. Like, we need something to do before we get back to the Joker arc. And here, it's like, we've only got 10 episodes. Like, the structure of it seems to lend itself more to something more tonally in line with one another. And that I think that's part of what makes it stand out, because of the limited time that you even have in the season to tell the story.
So far, it seems like our thoughts on the season are identical, by the way. So I guess you just had a much better take overall on the show than I did.
Well, I really like where it ends, right?
Like, right,
yeah,
it's true. It's true.
I think it ends exceptionally strong, and so
I agree.
I found myself sort of drifting to my phone, in some of these episodes. I watched part of the one with the first Supernatural one. I ended up, one of my youngest couldn't fall asleep, so she's like, "Can I stay up with you for a little bit?" So she came out. I'm like, "Sure, I'm watching this Batman show, which this should be fine for you to watch." And she was really taken by it and asking lots of questions. And I think that distracted me from where I'm come back to in this conversation, where I was really charmed with my daughter, just like really engaging with a show she otherwise wouldn't care about or watch. And then I'm sitting here with you. I'm like, yeah, but that wasn't very good.
All right, but I would agree with you that it does get better from here. Episode 8 is Nocturne. They have a fundraiser at a carnival for Harvey Dent's campaign. I don't know why. I don't think carnivals are super efficient money raising. There's a reason why we don't see these in real life very much. Is like carnivals aren't super efficient money raising things. But whatever. Multiple orphans go missing, and basically Natalia Knight, the younger sister of Anton Knight, suffers from a mysterious ailment that can only be staved off by draining the life force of people. So she starts just kind of draining these people's life forces. She's like a psychic vampire, like Dr. Sleep style,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think this was again very supernatural stuff, but a decent episode with Batman trying to save her after she's done some really, really horrible things. It kind of reinforces the ethos of Batman, like everyone is worth saving, and there's redemption possible for everyone. And so, anyway, yeah. Any thoughts on the Natalia Knight of it all?
Yeah, and like, if you're going to do supernatural, if we're going to bend reality a little bit, this at least felt better with. But the thing that I still find odd is
Because she's like a more grounded. She's not a ghost. She's like an actual physical character.
Right, but still, like part of the arc of the first supernatural episode is um Batman having to like ask multiple, like I think like is asked multiple times, like, well, it can't be a ghost, and then he sort of settles on, well, I guess it is a ghost,
I
and he
guess
never
it's a
really,
ghost. Yeah, yeah.
and like
I was
well,
very
and
disappointed by that as well. Yeah, I was
like a much more interesting version of this show, like episode, is him really wrestling with like, oh, like shit, like there are ghosts, and it seems like the show introduces this kind of exceptionally silly supernatural character to then just open the door to other supernatural characters, but then Batman just takes, well, I guess reality's broken, like everything's on the table now, and does not question
right.
the nature of like this person, what's happening to them. I guess I was I was hoping that the take for the supernatural here was going to be a more Scooby-Doo type thing, which is, again, like you said, like someone figures out something that's slightly outside the bends of technology in the world that's presented. But at the end of the day, you're still kind of like Wizard of Oz, like pulling back a curtain and like revealing some sort of fraud, and like actually they were actually murdering these kids, yada yada. And I don't know. It works better here, but my fundamental problems still exist, and I don't like the fact that the show doesn't have Batman / Bruce Wayne acknowledging how weird this is, and like that this is a problem that he's dealing with, because it's a show about, at its core, is it about political corruption, like within institutions of a city. And every time we deviate to a ghost running through walls and leaving ectoplasm on the wall, it feels a little weird that that's what we're spending our time with.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It's weird to have a grounded version of Batman character, introduce supernatural things, have Batman comment on it, like say, "Hey, wow, like this guy seems to be a ghost, but that's not true because ghosts are impossible." And then the show ends up is actually ghosts are possible, and then Batman never comments on it again, really, or never like deals with it. That's just like odd. It's an odd decision. That's an odd series of decisions.
Yes.
But I will say the episode was pretty cool. You know, like the when Natalia like starts sucking the life out of people, that's like a very genuinely creepy effect.
Yes,
I think.
Agree.
And this episode sets up all the Harvey Dent stuff. What's great about the Harvey Dent stuff is he's a kind of a legit character.
Yes.
Throughout the whole season. And then there's a 2-episode arc that kind of brings like kind of transforms him into Two-Face. And I just thought that was a very impressive way to do it, of like, we're going to have this character, you're going to see him throughout the whole season, and then we're going to dedicate 2 whole episodes to his character. So he gets acid thrown on him because he decides to press charges against Thorne's friend. Thorne is like a big, basically mobster type character in Gotham City. Harvey Dent proceeds with charges against him, and then as a result gets acid thrown in his face. And so as a result loses his bid for mayor, becomes permanently scarred in the face, becomes reclusive, and starts developing an alternate personality. Dietrich Bader plays Harvey Dent / Two-Face in the show. I thought he did a wonderful job. What do you think of his performance, Patrick Klepek?
I think he was great. I was constantly sort of shocked every time I would pause the show and realize who was the voice actor behind a character. I think that the show does, despite the fact that many of the performances are people you might know, it doesn't, like, there's like really good work happening there that doesn't feel like it's just stunt casting to put a name associated with something. And there's just a lot of humanity like put into Harvey Dent and eventually what becomes Two-Face. I think the arc this character goes on, the interpretation of what it even means to be Two-Face, is really fascinating. Again, like, I think this show over and over like looks at the origin stories of these characters and tries to find something interesting to do with it. Even if it's treading over similar ground, it's finding new angles on it. And I found that to be like absolutely the case with Two-Face, to be just a really fascinating character to follow as we watch their kind of descent into madness.
I think what is interesting about this is the kind of most protracted Harvey Dent transformation I've seen. I can
Yeah.
recall seeing. Maybe in the animated series it was this long as well, but like if you think about like the Dark Knight or Batman and Robin, or like any other depictions of Harvey Dent, it's usually he gets the acid thrown on him and then he's like a different guy. Whereas this one, again, much more grounded, where he gets the acid thrown on him, you see him kind of mentally deteriorate and struggle deeply with himself over like a pretty lengthy period of time, like basically two full episodes of the show. And again, just very novel, interesting. I just haven't seen that depiction before.
Well, and Bruce Wayne
Um,
is the one who pushes him over the edge, right? Like, I
mhm,
think that's one of the
mhm.
most interesting elements of the
Yeah, yeah.
entire concluding arc of the season is, you know, the old butler being like, "Hey, Bruce, I think that was a pretty shitty thing that you did to your friend. I think that was selfish." And, like all those dynamics lead to it enhances the villain, right? Like there's a lot of questions asked in a lot of Batman storytelling of, who is responsible for this rogues gallery appearing in the corruption of Gotham City? Does the appearance of Batman simply make everything worse as a result? And certainly there are elements of that here, but like the questions it's asking about Batman/Bruce Wayne's inability to reconcile his own past leads him to create a villain, or at least push somebody who is on the edge toward a villainous arc as a result of their own kind of selfishness to, quote, like, stop crime. I thought that was a really fascinating take for both characters.
Yeah. Fair point. I will say, Patrick, one thing I didn't really like about this show in general is, and this is not a complaint I usually have, but there's too much action in the show. And let me say the reason why that is most of the action is not very interesting. In my opinion, like there's a lot of fight scenes in this where it's like Batman, punching a guy or throwing a guy against a wall or whatever. And I just didn't think it was very interestingly done. Like it's usually like a fairly wide angle shot and Batman's doing the same kind of number of moves. Like the choreography I didn't find particularly compelling. I was watching some X-Men 90, I saw some clips from X-Men 97 recently online, and it's like, man, that show had good action. It's like interestingly framed. It's like obviously the characters all have really wild abilities in that show, but that is a show that has really good animated action. I did not love the action in Batman Cape Crusader. What did you? There's a lot of it in these last two episodes. What do you think, Patrick?
I think what you touch on is something I noticed by the end is the show in general struggles to depict the Batman parts of Batman. You'll notice we never really see him swinging around, going into windows, out of windows. He just appears.
Yeah, and he vanishes. Yeah.
All we ever see is him driving around in the car. But beyond that, like, we don't really see him using his gadgets, and the show in general, I think, struggles or chooses not. Like, I think it struggles to depict Batman doing Batman-y things, and maybe the sense is that will make the show feel less grounded if you see this, Bat character like grappling through the air or scrambling up a building. I'm not sure, but I think that goes hand in hand with your same criticisms over the action, because it feels like the show feels like it needs to have action scenes, but then it doesn't know how to depict that particularly interestingly. And in the moments where Batman is more passive or sneaking around, they just sort of cut to, and Batman has appeared. And it almost became like a running joke to me, where like every time he would just appear next to a window and then exit a window, but give us no sense of how he's actually accomplishing the getting in or the getting out.
Yep.
And it doesn't feel like the show has a great answer to that for the setting that it's in. So it's something I'm hoping it can come up with some better answers for in a second season. We're like, at some point, it's going to be a little weird that you're not really showing us these parts of the character that are pretty integral to how he's getting around and being effective.
I mean, to be fair, he has access to far fewer gadgets because it is 1940s era Batman. So The only thing he really has is like a grappling hook and the batarang, and
Right.
that's it. I do appreciate how they showed uh his vehicle. There's a little compartment that his outfit is in. Like he's not wearing it all the time. Like there's a little vehicle compartment. It opens up, and he's like, "Okay, I got to get dressed now in this car,
Yeah.
the back of this car." It's again super grounded, which is what makes the whole supernatural stuff so like odd.
He's
Is
got a phone number.
he's got a
And
phone
they
number?
even crack a joke about the like.
Yeah,
Well, like what am I gonna do? Like put out like a light for you to respond to? I
right,
guess the show's being smart
right.
constantly about how do we do a version of this that makes sense for where the era the character is in. It doesn't seem too silly.
Yeah, yeah. But I agree with you. Like a lot of the Batman-y stuff, we see very little of it. I mean, we see, one of the issues, quote unquote issues we had with the first half, or I had, is that it's not really about Batman, the show, right? Like Batman is very much a side character in this whole show, and that continues in the final 5
Mm-hmm.
episodes. Like there's vast stretches of time where Batman slash Bruce Wayne barely even show up in this, and I just think it's an interesting decision. It was tough for me because I think in the animated series, I really was like attached to that character, that Bruce Wayne Batman character. Like that's who I'm rooting for. That's who I'm relating to. This show is not really interested in that. It's like, hey, we're going to explore all these other. We're going to spend a lot of time with Police Commissioner Gordon and his daughter. Like that's a ton of time is spent like exploring their thoughts on Gotham and the justice system and so on. And it's like, uh, I don't know. I think it kind of hurts the show because I really think you need the grounding of a main character, like Batman being the protagonist, and I don't even feel like he's really the protagonist here. Patrick, do you agree with that assessment? What do you think?
I wonder if part of the reason that the show chooses not to engage too deeply with that is because are we just gonna like go through Batman's trauma over his parent? Like the what territory is there to mine from a background that we're so intimately familiar with? But I think by not going there to any meaningful degree, it comes at the expense of allowing you to get to any interiority with this character. And the show's been smart enough about how it's reconceptualized origins for villains. I think it should apply the same creativity to Bruce Wayne. And part of my worry is some of the best ways we got an angle on that was Harvey Dent, right? Like this is his best friend. He was willing to be pushed back on Bruce Wayne. He didn't know about the Batman part of his life, but he was willing to be critical of Bruce Wayne and how he presents himself and what he's hiding from the world. And we don't really get any sense that character is coming back in season 2. It seems, I hope the show has the confidence to continue what it depicts in its final moments, and that, Two-Face is just dead at the end of the show. But who's going to be that foil? Who is, I suppose it's, Joker as teased at the end of the season, but the character we're seeing there is already like a big weirdo. It might be a fun weirdo, but there was something about having Harvey Dent and even like the Two-Face Harvey Dent as a human foil that was intimately familiar with Bruce Wayne as a person. Mm-hmm. And who is that character in season 2? I'm not sure. And if we lose that, I feel like we're going to be in a similar situation that you're describing, of one where it's a show that has Batman, but is really about the interior lives of these other characters. And that can still be a good show, but it does feel like the balance is a little off.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, we should say what actually happens, right? Barbara and Batman and Police Commissioner Gordon and Montoya all try to save Harvey Dent. The idea is that Thorne's men are trying to kill Harvey Dent. And so this is, again, big action scenes, tons of action in the show that I don't think is particularly that interesting. But they try to save Harvey Dent, and there is a shootout, and Harvey Dent this whole time has been torn between, wanting to be a good person and wanting to be really angry and evil. And you kind of see that in the character and the performance. And in the climactic moment of the episode, he sacrifices himself to save Barbara from getting shot by Flash. one thing I am curious about is like how the show's next season, if there is one, I think it's been renewed.
Yeah,
Right?
it has been renewed. Yeah.
Is how they're going to deal with the police force, right? Like clearly, Flash and Bullock are persona non grata. They have burned their cover or whatever. So like, are they gonna be on the outs? Like, are they gonna
hmm
be in jail? Or like, are they gonna be suspended without pay? I don't know. Um, but anyway, yeah, he sacrifices himself, and it is a kind of powerful moment when he saves Barbara from being shot at the end of the show. Are they going to undo it and say, actually, it was just a flesh wound? He's still alive. Who knows? But I agree with you, Patrick. I hope that they don't do that. I will say one thing I didn't like about the Harvey Dent plotline. Like overall, I think is the way is executed really well done, really interesting. Um, probably the best thing about the season, I would say.
hmm
But one thing I didn't like, I don't think they did a good job of the coin flip stuff. Like I think it felt very like he does a coin flip and then they introduce a coin again later. Like
But he doesn't do anything with it.
yeah,
He just gives. He just gets the coin back in jail, and then it doesn't become.
yeah.
Which is fine
So
if you want to ditch that as like, hey, it's a kind of a silly conceit for this character. It doesn't work for the version of the character we're doing. That's fine.
yeah, but then just don't. Why mention it?
Then just don't do it.
Yeah, just don't do it. Don't do a half-assed version of it.
Right.
I thought that was a little odd. But
I agree.
Patrick Klepek, closing thoughts on Batman Caped Crusader. Oh, we should talk about the quote unquote post credits sequence. It's not really post credits. It's like post show sequence, right? Where we do see a glimpse of Joker. He appears to be testing some kind of laughing gas on people or laughing drug. I actually found this to be very chilling. You basically see people who have laughed themselves to death. So there's like dead bodies. People have laughed themselves to death, and you see this guy who looks like Joker testing it on someone, and that is dark. That is dark stuff. Patrick, what do you think of this introduction of who we assume is Joker?
Yeah, I think it was great. I agree. It was chilling, and I'm encouraged by the show showing similar restraint in a Batman Begins sort of fashion. Of we know we have to get here. You kind of can't tell a Batman story without the Joker. It's too tied up in what it says about him, his personality, and Gotham. But like, take your time getting there. And I'm glad that the show took its time getting there because it sets up a pretty interesting world to drop a chaotic character like that in. And it seems like it's going to have a very similar approach to its other villains, where it's just a little askew from what you've seen before, in a way that I'm like really intrigued to see how they expand upon it.
Yeah, just the visual of the guy like with the mouth open,
Yeah,
and the eyes like all bloodshot and dead, like not moving. Yeah, it's really upsetting to me. We heard a little bit of the Joker's voice too. Like I think just like he says like one or two words, and it seems like it's going to be a pretty different take than, let's say, Mark Hamill's version from the animated series, right? So like,
yeah, it'd be hard to imagine it would be the same sort of chaotic laughter
energy,
sort of character. Yeah.
But it does feel like it's as evidenced by him just straight up murdering people. He's introduced murdering people, right? So like, it's such a more grounded, dark take on this character. Again, it just makes some of the decisions that the show made to deviate from that tone all the more confusing for me. So anyway, at the end of the day, didn't love the supernatural stuff at all. Didn't love Onamapia as a villain. I thought the Nocturne episode was okay, and then the Harvey Dent stuff was overall very strong.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, Patrick, or shall we wrap it up there?
No, I think that's a good place to end it. But a good season of television, like more than I was expecting, and so I'm excited to see what they do next.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.